Welcome to those of us that are joining us live streaming. As I indicated in my opening remarks, we have two versions of a live streaming presentation. Many people around the world and around the country have typically joined us for our school lunch and learn, and hopefully we'll find out after this presentation how many joined us and from which countries as well. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Greg Evans. He holds a PhD. He is the director of the Institute for Studies in Transdisciplinary Engineering, Education and Practice, otherwise known as ISTEP, which I understand resides here in the Myhall Center. It is a new department at the University of Toronto. In addition to that position, he is the director of the Collaborative Specialization in Engineering Education. He is a 3M National Teaching Fellow and a member of the University of Toronto's President's Teaching Academy. Obviously, with those credentials, he is a true educator. The subject of his presentation today will be re-engineering education for a changing landscape. And that is typically a non-technical subject. And obviously, given the turnout here today, it is a subject that's of considerable interest to those of us here that are with us today. So please join me in welcoming Professor Greg Evans.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, and it's a real pleasure to be here. I was sharing with a few people that I'm actually very excited to give this talk because it's a different perspective. It's nice to be able to position what we are doing for alumni, because that'll give a broader perspective. I should also acknowledge that today's talk is being done on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and more recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. It's important I say that because my wife is Indigenous and I'll get in a lot of trouble if I go home and have not said that. I also want to acknowledge the many people online. I gather that we have people joining us all the way from Korea, so I'll try to make this talk good. So I'm going to take you on a little journey, and we're going to do this together, but I'm going to position it as a story. Now, I thought about having a story that was about once upon a time, there was a little red schoolhouse that educated engineers, but I'll try to position it slightly differently. Really what I'll do is I'm going to use the storyline to give a narrative to what I want to talk about. I'll set the stage in terms of some of the current context. I'll introduce an incredibly compelling but not so perfect character, myself. And then I'll develop the story and we'll come to an ending, which will not be ending because like any good blockbuster movie, there must be a sequel. And really I want to make sure that you understand that the best is yet to come. So we're going to do this on 3 levels. You got to bear with me on this. So one is the storyline. I'm going to use that to keep the flow going. The second is I want to help you learn about engineering education. What are some of the things causing change? How do we teach differently in our classrooms? And the third part is I want you to experience it. So I'm going to use some of the techniques I use in my classrooms to get an idea, so you can get an idea of what it is to experience learning and learn about learning. That's called metacognition, and we're going to come back to that as we go. But we're going to start now. So one of the first things I want you to do is just take 15 seconds, think to yourself, this is a personal reflection, what do I hope to learn from this talk? Okay, the reason I do that is that learning requires fertile ground. So by opening up your mind to the idea of what sort of things will be there, what sort of ideas can grow in it, it'll make the learning process proceed more effectively. So we're going to come back to some of what I call these metacognitive moments, and at the end I'm going to explain to you really what metacognition is about. So on with the story. instead of using the little red schoolhouse, doing the historic thing, what I'm going to do is try to position this in terms of our current landscape. I'm going to do this in terms of some provocative questions, really is, what is the role of education? What is the role of universities? And how does learning fit into our modern economy? So the first is this question of higher versus higher education. You'll see universities are being faced with this a lot. We know the world has changed a lot since I was a student here. It's almost 4 decades ago now. I know that's a small amount of time for some of you in the audience, but for me it feels like a long time. Nowadays, very few of our graduates go on to traditional roles in engineering. In fact, in Ontario, from Statistics Canada, it's only 19%. So 80% of our students do not go to traditional jobs in engineering, and that's okay. However, there's a mismatch between what we are teaching and what they will actually need for career success. There's a mismatch between the amount of time and energy we instructors and the students put into that learning and what will actually help them along the way. So that's the case that I'm going to build. I'm going to make the case that the technical foundation is incredibly important because that's the foundation for future learning, but there are other things that they can also learn that will amplify that knowledge, make them more successful, and allow our engineers to have even greater impact when they go out into the world. So the question arises often, why do we have these places of higher learning? Why do we have build-ins? Why do we have bring people together in learning communities? What is the role of a university with the potential of online learning? Well, the reality is that we learn collaboratively. We learn by talking with each other. It's not about content delivery. You can go online and find any piece of information you want. You can go online and find videos to show you how to do almost anything that you want. So why have these places of higher learning? Why have these universities? Well, it's because it brings people together to learn. It's not about the content, it's about the experience and how you can navigate that experience. And we can do that far more effectively at a university than we can if people are doing it individually. But we just don't take advantage of it. We have this amazing opportunity at universities like U of T, and I'll get into that, but we're just not taking advantage of the right things. And so I'm going to show you how we can change that direction. The idea is that learning is supposed to integrate the many experiences, your in-classroom, your co-curricular experiences, your workplace experiences, in-community experiences. It's supposed to bring all of that together, but too much of the focus is on the idea, I need to learn this course, this course, this course, and this course. And I'll show you why that doesn't necessarily work. The other thing is that by bringing our very brightest minds together, the students in particular, with the instructors, it brings out the best in us. It brings out the best in the students, brings out the best in the faculty, and it allows us to bring out the best in ourselves. So one last point about the context. The world has changed. We had what was called a knowledge-based economy. We're now talking about a learning-based economy. There was a time where we could prepare our students with knowledge, and that knowledge would allow them to prosper throughout their careers. Nowadays, it's not about what you know, it's about how quickly you can learn. The students that can learn the quickest are going to be the most successful. So the most fundamental thing that we can do is teach our students how to learn. More importantly, we need to teach them how to create a community within their workplaces where they can learn and they can teach others more effectively. So teaching and learning is not something that's on the side, it's now paramount for all of us. So that's one of the things we're going to focus on, and I will talk about metacognition and the idea of why it is that we can better enable people for this. So, are we responding? Well, here's a picture you may have seen of a 14th century classroom. There's some cynics who say that if you were to take a farmer, a lawyer, and a doctor and transport them to the 21st century, they would be completely lost. They would have no idea how to do their job. However, if you were to take a university instructor from the 14th century and put them in one of our classrooms, they would know exactly what to do. I'm not quite that cynical. There are changes that occur in, but the model we're using is an old model of content delivery, and that's not what our students need. So, take this to the higher level. We're going to do this one slightly different. I want you to think about what connections you're making, and we're going to do this as a technique. It's a very simple technique called Thinkpair Share. So you're going to think, Then you're going to talk to somebody, that's the pair, and you're going to share. Before we do this, I need to be able to bring you back, so I'll show you the technique I use in my classroom. When I clap once, you clap once. When I clap twice, you clap twice. So let's try that. Okay, we got it. So take a moment, think, what connections are I making with the way that I see university education? Give yourself 15 seconds, and then talk to somebody sitting beside you. All right. Well, the reason we do this is the most effective way of learning is by sharing your perceptions with somebody else and hearing back from them. Learning is collaborative. That's why we have the universities. So we'll do this a couple more times, but the idea is that if you want to learn something, try teaching it to somebody else. All right. We're going to try another one. This is a personal reflection. This is called an accessible explanation. So when I'm lecturing in class, I get to a tricky concept, I will stop and I will say, can you hear me without the microphone? We're okay, June? There we go. So I'll stop and I'll say, try to explain the concept I just gave you to a grade 12 student. Take a moment, think about it, and then explain it to the person you're with. They'll explain it back. And questions will come about from that. And then we'll have a class discussion about it. But the idea is that if you can take knowledge and make it accessible to somebody else, you begin to understand it. So this is the question we're going to look at. What I'm going to do is give my perspective on it. So this is when I bring my character into the story. 15 years ago, I became very interested in engineering education, how we can teach more effectively. This is how I would explain to a first or second year student what they're supposed to do sitting in the classroom. I said, knowledge is like a jigsaw puzzle. It was an incredibly simple representation, but it gave them an idea what to do. The idea is that we are going to put together a picture together over this term. I'm going to describe things. It's like handing you a piece of the puzzle, and you need to do something with that. You need to connect it with something in about 15 to 20 seconds. Because if you don't, that'll be equivalent to putting it back in the box, and at the end of the term, you're going to have a box full of puzzle pieces instead of a picture of what's going on. So the idea here, first and foremost, is in order to learn, you need to make a connection. Knowledge is taking information and making connections. You have to connect it to something you know already. Now, it gets more complicated, because I realize this was an incredibly simplistic description. The idea is that students have different pre-existing knowledges. So I hand them a puzzle piece, and it looks quite different to them than it does to me. So it doesn't have the same colors, it does not have the same shape. So I need to understand how they see the puzzle piece before I can show them how to put it together. The whole thing has to become much more student-centered. I can give them the scaffolding, which is the jargon we use for the outlines, the corner pieces and the sides, so they can start building the knowledge together. But there has to be this constant back and forth so that they can see it, explain to me what they see, and then I can suggest to them, well, you might look at it slightly differently here, but the key thing is you have to make the connections. So why is that? Well, I tell students there's different types of knowledge. This is called epistemology. What is knowledge? And this is a model I use for engineering students. I say there's three types of knowledge. Declarative knowledge, which is knowing what. Procedural knowledge, which is knowing how. And conditional knowledge, which is knowing when. So we're going to explain those in just a second, but I'm going to show you another exercise, which is really, really corny. But I do it with my students, and I'll explain to why I do it afterwards. So if you think that the first one is the most important, put one finger on your forehead. If you think the second one is most important, put two on your forehead. If you think the third one is most important, put three on your forehead. And I am going to wait here until everybody's got fingers on their forehead. And I can see you. I see some people are not playing, but that's okay, I'll just wait. One for one, two fingers for two, three for three. Okay, well, I'll explain what each of them are, but really it's an example. So I can do this with a class of 120 students. I can see who is engaged and who is not, who is following and who isn't, and I can watch their eyes. The reason it's on their forehead is that way the rest of the class can't see it, so they can't necessarily look around. I can also watch, as I did here, who responds quickly, who is immediately engaged, who responds slowly, who's unsure, and it gives me an idea where I need to go as well. We have a question. Yes, we can do questions. Well, that's great, because now we're going to do the group discussion about the third category. You're right with it. Thank you, sir. So declarative knowledge is the stuff instructors love. Knowing what? It's the theory, it's the definition, it's all that stuff we call the fundamentals. Procedural knowledge is the stuff the students love. Show me how to do it. How do I solve this problem set? How do I do this lab? How do I do things? Conditional knowledge is knowing when do you think about something in terms of heat transfer, fluid flow, thermodynamics. It's a design problem, it's a societal problem. It's knowing which knowledge do you apply when. And we are very good at declarative. Students love procedural. It is this conditional knowledge that is most important to them when they graduate, is realizing that this is a situation where I need this set of knowledge, and that's what I need to go for. So it's really to get students to have that broader picture and look at the conditional knowledge. And this is all building up to this idea of metacognition. All right, now the story is going to get exciting. We're going to develop the story here. So I'm going to talk about 4 points. Modern pedagogy, giving an idea of how we're starting to teach. I'll talk about active learning. I'll talk about cooperative learning. I promised there would be some sort of tension, some sort of conflict adversity. So I'm going to talk about the tyranny of content and how we're going to overthrow that. It's not quite Game of Thrones, but I'll try. And then really to the more important points of lifelong and life-wide learning and what these transdisciplinary competencies are. Those are the more esoteric points. So a bit about this active learning. So at the turn of the century, Ebbinghaus did some studies on how long people can retain information they do not connect with. So he did this by taking random information that there was no way that they could connect with, and he studied how long he could retain it. So that's back to the puzzle pieces, that if you have a puzzle piece, and I hand you an hour's worth of puzzle pieces, and you are unable to connect them, how long can you retain that? And basically, at the end of an hour, you will have forgotten 60% of it. So I know that if I lecture to a group of students and if I do not give them time to connect with that knowledge, that's incredibly inefficient. They'll have forgotten 60% of it by the time they finish. That's a problem. So the whole trick is to give them time to connect. That's the idea of active learning, is give them time to process. It's like eating a meal. You both have to eat and you have to digest it. If you just eat and you never digest, well, we'll get back to that. So the good news is that each time you learn it, you retain more. So this curve is a little complicated, but the idea that each time you go through a repetition, you have to put a little less effort into learning it, and you retain it for longer. So the idea is that we want to learn through multiple iterations. We want to design our courses around the idea that students will see a concept several times along the way, and each time they see it, they'll retain it for longer. So this gives the idea of active learning, making sure that classrooms have time for students to actively process what they're learning. And there's a lot of solid evidence. So this is a study that Carl Wyman did while he was at UBC. He's a Nobel Prize winner in physics, really passionate about teaching physics, and did a beautiful control study that appeals to engineers, not so much people from the education field, because it's a little artificial, but 2 sections of a class, taught them together for 11 weeks, and weeks 12 and 13, they did one by conventional lecturing with a very engaged lecturer, and one by active learning, and they studied those 2 sections of the class learning exactly the same material. What they found is that on the test scores, the students that had the active learning did a lot better, but they were also attending more and much more engaged. They had people around actually watching the students, which is something that I do. I go into classrooms for my colleagues, and I will watch the students because they ask me to, and I give them an idea when they're engaged and when they pull out their cell phones. So active learning works. What is it? Well, I've been trying to give you an idea of some of it. So we've done some of it here. So the simplest one is a Thinkpair Share. We did some of that. Accessible explanation. I did that with the first year class. We did a vote and discuss with the fingers on the forehead. I gave you topic bingo. That's something I use to start most of my courses. We do this as a way for people to get to know each other. You say what you do, what you know, and you go find someone else who knows the same thing. So it's a mixer sort of thing, but also gets you to ask questions because you're not supposed to know the answers. You're supposed to learn to go ask somebody else, or at least listen when the answer comes up. So these are the idea of active learning. Things like role play I do in my second year environmental chemistry course, where students create an entire environmental consulting company, and we do simulations about what it's like to be in a boardroom, what it's like to be in front of the board of directors. So the idea of doing a role play that way to put that sort of learning into context. The other big one, particularly in this building, if you walk around this building on the floors below, you're going to find these classrooms where everybody is sitting in teams. The idea of that is collaborative learning, where it's much more effective to have students learn together. We even have our big lecture room downstairs, my hall 150, where the students sit in teams of 4 in a classroom with 450 students. The idea is they spend a lot of time talking to each other about what they're learning, because learning is collaborative. It's the idea of building shared knowledge, but you learn more when you hear from somebody else how they see it, and they see how you see it. You build knowledge together. Helps identify the misconceptions, and it also helps them develop their team skills, which I'll come back to later. Yeah. All right, running short of time. So we're going to take another moment here. We'll do this one as a Thinkpair Share again. So I'll bring you back with 1 clap, 2 claps. So take a moment. What is surprising you about this, and what conflicts with your prior understanding? Think about that, and then discuss it with somebody else. All right, does anyone want to share any thoughts that came up? Or we can pause and I'll just stare at you.
We had a
Couple online. We have brave people online. Okay.
Maura said that the collaboration piece, and then Stella said it's surprising that the when of knowledge is more important than the how.
The when of knowledge, yes. Yes, go ahead. The when of knowledge is more important than the how of knowledge. So is the idea of the conditional, is when to use it.
Is that true?
If you don't know when to use the right knowledge, knowing how to use it, if you use the wrong one at the time, I would say yes. Yep, 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 yep. Toby, you want to? Sorry, Toby, I can't hear you because people are talking.
I just wanted to say that it was interesting to see the difference that active learning has in students' learning compared to control. It's like about 20% difference on attendance, engagement, so it's pretty significant.
Yeah, let me comment on that. So it's not that when you do active learning in a classroom, it gets widely embraced the first or second or third or fourth time. Students and instructors are very happy with the current model of I tell you what you need to know, you tell it back to me, and we both feel good about it. It is sort of a lowest common denominator. So when you use active learning in classroom, it's very important for the students to understand why they're doing it, because it really is putting responsibility for the learning back to the students. Whereas students will be happy with the idea that you're the instructor, you take responsibility for my learning, and I don't have to worry about it. Sir, yes?
Just a little surprised at the group learning that you describe. In any group, there's a leader. And I'm afraid that in a case like that, they break down 400 people into 100 groups of 4, and you have, in each one will be someone who learns and is very involved. Then there'll be the people who are maybe listening, maybe not, or overwhelmed and never speak. So I don't really like this whole concept of getting everybody.
I think it's fair enough, and it really does come down to the instructor. So walk it around. As an instructor, I can get a pretty good idea by halfway through the course who is struggling and who's not, and approach them and not let people who have more dominant personalities take over. There will be certainly people in group who will declare themselves as the leader. Often they're not the brightest in the group. Often they're not the most effective in the group, and it takes the group a while to do this, to learn this. So I'll take one more.
I think the other thing is, a key word
Yes.
And you see that in the big auditorium, because not only do you have those tables of 4, each table has a microphone, and the person at the front can select, give you the right to talk sort of thing, and encourages feedback.
Yeah. All right, well, we're going to get into the conflict. Just a second. So, how do we move towards that? How do we overthrow this tyranny of content? We love knowledge. As instructors, boy, we love knowledge. Our knowledge is precious to us, and we love sharing it with students. And if I teach a course for 15 years, every year I'll add in one more good thing, and another good thing, and another good thing. And it's sort of the analogy of a chef who is preparing this amazing meal and keeps adding dishes and keeps serving you up these dishes. They're all really good dishes, but if you never have a chance to process that information, what should be an amazing experience quickly becomes a very painful one. And that's what's going on in our classrooms, is that we've had to add in many, many more things to Learnin, and it's very hard to take things out. That is the tyranny of content. We're not looking at what it is we really want our students to know at the end of our course, or what we want them to know at the end of our program. What would that look like? So how would I know if a student has learned this? What would they be able to do? What would they be able to think? And how should I design the course based upon that? So we have to flip the old model on its head. The old model used to be, Greg, you got to teach a course. I would start thinking about, what are 15 really important things about this topic? Let's come up with the content. And then I'll talk about it, and good experience for me. That's about it. Now we have to flip it on its head to figure out what is the most effective way for students to learn a given concept. So I've done some work in trying to overthrow what I call this tyranny of content, because it's like a Rubik's Cube that we were trying to change, but we've lost the degrees of freedom. It's very, very hard to take things out of our program, but we have to put more things in. So this is one model I do workshops with. It is a plot. It talks about the importance of the learning versus the effectiveness. These are data for one of my courses, and what I ask people to do is, if you have 13 weeks in the class, you have 13 topics, you rate each one of them by how important it is that a student know that after they graduate. So those would be the ones down by 1 is the most important. You rate them by how effective the learning is. 1 would be the most effective. And you come up with a plot like this. So the stuff that is down here at the bottom is the stuff that's really important and effective. It's really important for the students, and they're learning it effectively. Good stuff. Okay, we'll just leave that alone. The stuff at the top here is the stuff that is not really all that important, and they're not really learning it that well. So that's the opportunity. That's the stuff that's got to go. So where do we put that? Well, obviously we move that over to the stuff that is important but not as effective. That's where we can put more time and get a more efficient learning process from it. So by doing something like this, instructors can see where it is that they are really being inefficient. There's diminishing returns. Students only have so many hours in the day, so much energy, and we need to get them to focus on where it's most important. All right, on to the heavy stuff. Lifelong learning. How do we empower that? Well, basically, what we do now is, in an undergraduate degree, it gives you a knowledge foundation. The more knowledge you have, the quicker you can learn. So it's a perpetuating cycle. The more knowledge you have, the more connections you can make with those puzzle pieces. The more what we call anchor points, and the more that you can link those together rather than have these little buried pockets of knowledge. I had this course in second year, it was on fluid flow, I never want to think about that again, or a course in organic, or my course, never want to think about that. You can help the students take those points and learn continuously from them. More importantly, they need to learn what a learning process is. And I'll show you that in just a sec. The other one is this life-wide learning. It's the idea that students need to be able to connect their knowledge across all their experiences, across all their courses, to their co-curricular, to their workplaces, to their community base, to their global exchanges. They need to be able to connect all those knowledge And the only way they can do that is if they can connect it through themselves. So the studies show that you can't take one abstraction like fluid flow and connect it to another one like chemistry unless you can connect it through your own experience. So the idea of life-wide learning is if they can see it from their experience, they can connect all these different parts and kind of a much richer map, a much broader understanding. Awareness of learning, which is metacognition, is that foundation. So I'll talk about that. So you've been doing metacognition. It's a fancy word, big word for an engineer. But it's a useful one. Metacognition is knowledge of one's knowledge processes, cognitive and affective. Affective is emotional. So both how you think about things analytically and emotionally, and your ability to consciously and deliberately change that by monitoring and regulating it to change your knowledge processes, cognitive and affective. So it's knowing about learning and the capacity to regulate your learning. And that's what we're encouraging students to learn about, to take responsibility for their own learning. Why is this so important? Well, because the decisions they're making are so much more complicated. So the idea if you have limited metacognition, you're not aware of your learning, it can cause two things. It can either cause insecurity about knowledge. So you took a course and you walked out of that course thinking, gosh, I hope I never have to think about that again. You never have to think about it again, and when you're faced with a challenge that really does involve that sort of thinking, that's the last place you want to go. You want to go to the sort of thinking that makes you feel good about yourself. So if you're not aware that you're really not using that sort of thinking, that can be a problem. The other one is limited metacognition for people who are radically overconfident, and I do see this in my students. The idea that sometimes the students that seem the most confident are the least aware of their learning. They don't understand why they did so poorly on that midterm or why they did so poorly on the exam because they're just not aware of that learning process. There is an effect called Dunning-Kruger, which is a psychological term for it. It's the idea that those who are least aware are often the most self-confident and do things like post things on social media or send tweets out, for example. So it is a problem, and it can cause students to make really tragic decisions if they end up as engineers. There's a link between metacognition and critical analysis, how well you're willing to critique something, and creativity, how well you're willing to believe into your own ideas. So the idea is if we can enhance metacognition, it can improve the students. So here's a simple framework, and you've done this already. So it's regulation of your cognition. I've had you do this in a few exercises. Plan what it is I want to learn. Monitor, am I learning it? Evaluate afterwards, did I learn what I need to learn? Super simple to put on a PowerPoint slide like this, really tough to do in practice. And it's awareness of the types of knowledge. Do I need to know declarative knowledge? Am I looking for theory? Am I looking for definitions? Is it procedural knowledge? Do I need to figure out how to fix the faucet in my home? Or is it conditional knowledge that I'm after? So it's being able to think about the knowledge. That's the key to learning how to learn. So we'll do this one as an individual. Think about it for just 15 seconds. What can I do to increase my metacognitive awareness? What can you do when you leave here today? If you don't do something, you're going to forget about it within one day. You've already probably forgotten about a lot of what I just said. And it's tough. So what can I do to increase my metacognitive awareness? Take 15 seconds and think about that. Okay, we're going to press on. We won't do a debrief on this one. I've got two more topics I want to talk about. One is, what should a university experience look like? So the idea is that we have universities, we have these bricks and mortar buildings, we have these dormitories. It's because it's supposed to be an immersive, integrated, holistic experience. Those are a lot of big words, but the idea is that you learn many different things in many different places. A university allows you to bring all of those together. Each student is different. Each student has their own set of experiences. Each student has their own path. And we need to guide each of those students on their own path. And we have 70,000 students on the campus. How do we do that? We want the students to be able to link what they learn in the classroom with all their outside experiences. We want students to link how they develop competencies with their own personal growth and really shape a new identity in our faculty's case, it's the idea of what it means to be an engineer. At what point do I feel that I am an engineer? We've done studies on this. It typically occurs between second and third year. We see that students start talking about engineers as us instead of them. So the idea that they've started to develop this idea of have a feel for what it is to be an engineer. So I had the privilege of chairing a panel for the university to come up with a vision of what should student experience be for our entire university, all 3 campuses. And that was an amazing undertaking because I got to talk to people right across the university. And what we did is we looked at what is distinct about the values of U of T, what's distinct about our university in terms of what we can offer. Yes? Sure. Thank you. So, the student experience was the idea of what are the values of the university, and I'll list those. What is it that the university can offer that's distinct? Who are our students coming in? We put those together in what sort of experiences should they have while they're here, and how will that create graduates who are U of T graduates? What does that mean? What is distinct about a U of T graduate? So I'll walk you through how we thought about that. So U of T has a lot of things that they value. Knowledge is one of the first and foremost. So we really value knowledge, but we value our students too. They come across the globe. We value the diversity of our students. We value that they develop a sense of belonging while they're here. They have a sense of community that they build up. We value that they learn how to explore while they're here, and that they're comfortable engaging with ideas. So those are a few things that we really think are important at U of T. So what do we do with that? Well, we design experiences that allow them to explore, to discover, to integrate knowledge across their experiences, to become self-aware, to push their boundaries so that they can grow, but do it in a way that's supportive. So it's really coming up with that balance because every student is different. We want them to engage in provocative yet constructive dialogue about the current issues. We want them to understand what it means to be a treaty person in Canada. We're all treaty people. How are they part of reconciliation? We want them to develop their identity. And mostly important at the bottom is to develop these lifelong and life-wide transferable skills. That's a whole lot of jargon. What do we do in practice? Well, what we want and what we think is really distinct about U of T is that we want to graduate students who are one or more of these. We want to have students that are passionate learners. We want students that are creative intellectuals. There's nothing wrong with valuing knowledge and being an intellectual, but we want people who can use it in creative ways. We want them to be empathetic leaders who can bring out the best in themselves and bring out the best in others. We want them to be resilient creators, people who can work with knowledge and don't stand back when they're faced with adversity. We want them to be knowledge mobilizers or knowledge entrepreneurs. Our currency is knowledge. We want them to be able to deal with some of the ambiguity of that and make something happen. And most importantly, we want them to be engaged citizens. Yes?
Commuter versus dormitory students. That makes an immense impact on these products.
And what sort of experiences they can have, and the idea is how can we set up hubs so that people can commute. I'm a commuter as well. I talk to students on the GO train. But there are challenges as well for students who aren't in residence all the time. So I want you to take a moment, evaluate this. How did that resonate with your university experience? How did you have meaningful interactions? Can you think of a time when you had some interaction with somebody that really made a difference? Was it in the classroom? Was it in your residence? Was it part of a club? So what are the things that you probably didn't realize it at the time that really shifted your direction? So take a moment and think about that. Those are the things that we want. We want students that enjoy times of great joy together, that deal with adversity together. That's what we're looking for. Okay, I'm going to bring you back. I am very enthusiastic about this, so I'm going longer than I should. So what I'll do is I was going to talk a bit about the idea of these competencies. So I'll introduce that, but I was going to talk about team skills, how we teach team skills, what that means. I'll pass over that. The idea is that we are teaching students competencies. Competencies are combinations of skills, and we're interested in the ones that go across all the disciplines. So we say transdisciplinary, something that doesn't have a logical home in mechanical or civil or chemical. It really transcends all the disciplines. It's the things that we want every one of our students to be able to do. Examples of them: leadership, teamwork, communication, professionalism, entrepreneurship, management, global fluency. And our challenge is that over the last 15 years, that list has just kept growing, but we can't take things out. So what we need to do instead is teach all of these in context. We learned that 20 years ago with technical communication, that you cannot teach communication on its own. You need to teach it in conjunction with technical knowledge. Same thing with design, same thing with team skills. So we need to integrate them all into courses where they're learning technical skills, but they're learning the competencies at the same time. That's what ISTEP is about. So we're getting to the end here. I just want to spend a bit of time about this new institute, ISTEP, because I'm excited about it. It's only a year old. It's our first new department in the faculty for, I think, 20, 25 years. Certainly the leader in Canada. We have other universities starting to look at emulating what we're doing. But to try to bring together something that goes so far beyond the traditional disciplines, I think is incredibly exciting. And when Dean Amon suggested to me that there was this opportunity, I jumped on it, even though I had sworn I would never get into administration again. So here I am, because this is important. So what is it? It's a new institute. We have 14 faculty members, so we're able to hire faculty members. We're actively searching at the moment for new faculty members. And it's all about the teaching and the scholarship that transcends the traditional disciplines. So it brings together how we teach education, how we teach engineering education, what our students will do when they graduate, the competencies they'll need, and the practices, how the practice of engineering is changing. So it's based on the idea that we had faculty members who were teaching technical communication. The engineering communication program, ECP, has been around for about 20 years now. We had a leadership program that's been around for about 10 years, Troost iLead. We have a business minor that 1,400 students are taking. We have an entrepreneurship program Joe Parody heads up. That's been around for about 10 years. We have our Center for Global Engineering, which is also on the 7th floor, which is teaching global fluency. So we have these faculty members that don't really belong in any one particular discipline, so we brought them all together to create ISTEP. One of the focal points is we have a collaborative program in engineering education, so we have 14 PhD students at the moment, half of them from OISE in education, half from engineering, who are looking at how do we teach more effectively as well. So we have that research element to it as well. The teaching, some of it is courses, so we have 10 courses on communication, 15 courses on leadership, but the exciting part is the curriculum integration. How much teaching that we're doing that is almost invisible to the students, because they're doing an assignment and they're learning about teamwork at the same time as communication, as about leadership, as about business. So it really is a holistic learning experience. And there we're touching all of our undergraduate students, and we want to put in more. That's the way the education's got to go. It cannot be these silos of courses anymore. We have a range of scholarship. We're learning about how to teach teamwork, some of the stuff I jumped over. Very exciting work, very much a leader in the country, if not globally, in terms of what does it mean to function in a team. How do you teach engineers team skills? How do you teach them communication? We're doing stuff with data analytics, so student data analytics is a big area. How do we data mine all the data that students are producing? Leadership, lab-based education, engineering identity. We've done work with Raheem here in terms of engineering education in Africa, and work on virtual global teams. How do you work together as a team when you've never met each other and it's all over the internet? So these are some of the areas that we're studying. We have a vision for it. We bring together these exceptional people. We create knowledge through research to guide us. We look at how the practice of engineering is changing. We look at how the identity of what it means to be an engineer is changing. It means something very different these days for our students than it used to mean. And we look at impact. The impact is not just in our faculty, but we are leading nationally. We're working with all the other schools, and we want to lead internationally. But most importantly, we want our engineers to have much more impact in terms of how to build Canada. So our vision is a thriving ecosystem, that's all the students and the faculty, of instructional innovation to prepare 21st engineers who are exceptionally well equipped to address tomorrow's global challenges. And these are these really wicked problems that engineers are now being faced with. We need people who are equipped for that. So to bring it to the end, engineering education is very much in transition, and we're proud that U of T is able to step up and take a lead on that. We want to take advantage of the idea that we do have these buildings, we do have these incredible facilities to leverage the benefits of in-person learning. Having a student in the classroom, what can you do with that student in the classroom? And it's a lot more than lecturing to them. We want to integrate all their experiences to bring together a holistic experience, not a set of individual experiences. I hope I've convinced you lifelong learning. If you walk away with only one thing from today, remember, lifelong learning is the absolute key for my kids, but more importantly now, my grandkids. They have got to be able to learn throughout their lifetime. And we are re-engineering engineering curriculum. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm super excited about this, so I went a bit long. My apologies for that, but appreciate the comments and questions. I'll be happy to answer any that you have at the moment. So thank you.
Time for questions from the floor. If you would stand up, please.
Sure. I'm one of the 80%, going back to one of your earlier slides. And what struck me throughout was you're still producing engineers, and that's only 20% of the population that get out there and work. And shouldn't you go back to the old Greek concept of producing citizens? And really what I found with engineering, what it did is teach me a method of thinking that was linear and build on that. I suspect we built on linear a lot more now than I went through.
Yeah.
But it struck me that given that 80% of the people that you produce, your graduates that you produce, don't end up as engineers, I don't think the goal to produce an engineer is necessarily the right designation.
I think it's a totally fair question. I prefer to flip that on its head and say that we need to redefine what it is to be an engineer. So that is the idea of coming up with a new identity. I teach in chemical engineering. Most of the students I teach are not going to go end up working in a petroleum plant. We need to explain to them what it is going to look like for them when they do go out in the working world, but they will be using engineering knowledge, they'll be using their engineering education, so we just need to redefine what a 21st century engineer is.
John Cowan from 61 Industrial. They canceled the engineering and business course in 1960. And engineering and business was intended to be a broad engineering course with a touch of psychology, interpersonal relations, and all sorts of things. It was interesting that the wheel has turned, and you're now doing the sorts of thing in a much more sophisticated way than we did in engineering and business.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, and it's nice to have a comment about a period of time when I wasn't at the faculty, so. But yeah, things do go in cycles, and so it was a good idea at the time. I think engineering business, we can sort of wish that perhaps it had continued, but at least we're finding our way now.
I too remember taking the engineering and business course, and I wondered, why am I taking a course on business? I'm here to learn about engineering. In retrospect, I now understand. There was a question at the back, I believe.
Yes. When you're teaching team building, do you actually, or how do you counter the subculture of the series like Survivor, which is buried under there? So you're trying to build a team, and you know probably half of your audience is watching Survivor, which teaches you how to screw your neighbors. I mean, that's a big issue.
I won't comment on Survivor because I've never actually watched it, so perhaps I should now. I'll take your point. When I was vice dean of the faculty, can you hear me okay there? Should I go back to the mic? Yeah. We put in design, and we put in the idea, and this was about 15 years ago, 18 years ago now, that students should have at least one team experience every year, if not every term. And my analogy for that, it was like put in 4 students in a car to teach them how to drive, and you give them a car, and they drive, and they total the car. And you say, well, maybe you learned something, here's another car the next year. Really, there was no sort of conscientious understanding of what it means to teach team. We've done a lot of studies, so one of the faculty members, Patricia, that's her area of expertise. She did her PhD in that. And we now have a much better understanding of what a team looks like. They've done this by studying the first year students using cameras as they're in their team meeting. And the part that I'll share, because it seems to make so much sense, but it wasn't intuitive. So we knew that we need to give them vocabulary. So we need to teach them how to talk about being in a team. We need to teach them how to see the strengths in others and how to relate to others. But the idea of a team, and I'll use hockey as an analogy, is that you can teach somebody who is great at shooting, you can have somebody else on the team great at skating, somebody else on the team is great at deacon. But to have a team that works, it's having those coupled together. So it's teaching them the different skills, but getting the students to be able to pick up from each other that you just did this, I need to do that. So you just deked, now you need to pass, I'm going to skate, give it to somebody else, they're going to shoot. So by studying the videos, we've got a much better understanding how to guide students in terms of what a team looks like. And it's not just building up the individual competencies. And we've seen that you can get a bunch of students together that have great individual team skills. It does not make an effective team. Now, I haven't touched the Survivor thing, but we do have a much better idea what it is how to guide students to think about being an effective team. And we now have a 360 feedback tool that they can use to give each other feedback several times a year, and they build that up over the year so they can develop these skills as they go through our program.
Here. Sorry. Okay. First in front, and then the rear.
And then we got some online. Yes, go ahead, please.
So I just wondered if you could comment on the provincial government's move towards e-learning. I mean, I thought maybe you were going to say this is the modern way, we're all going to learn off computers, but you're emphasizing collaboration, and I'm thinking you'd be somewhat against it.
I think e-learning... sorry, thank you, Sonia. So the question is, can we comment on what is the value of e-learning? I'll leave the political aspect as to who's putting it in. I think online learning can enhance learning, so you can do things like flip a classroom or give them some of the content online. The idea of online learning alone, I do have a problem with. So I think there really is a strong case for having students come together and talk, and there's things that can go on. If you're very good at it, you can develop that online, but we're nowhere near as good online as we are in person these days. People behave differently. So yeah, I think it would be a shame. The idea that if we had universities that were all online, that would be a really different experience, particularly for the young students as well. It's okay as you mature more, but for the young students, that would be very different.
There was another question from the floor, and then we'll go online.
Where does an Edison fit into this?
Sorry again, where does the...
An Edison. Unique Edison engineer. Created so many different...
Thomas Edison or somebody.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I don't want to speculate as to what can give somebody those characteristics, but I would guess, so I am going to speculate, extreme self-confidence and creativity. So we've done some look at the idea of creativity and metacognition. Students can have lots of good ideas. It needs to be a very self-confident student that is willing to put that idea out there, and an extremely self-confident student that's willing to put it out there and become entrepreneurial about it. So I think is both a mix of cognitive brilliance plus the affective skills, the personality to make things happen, and that's what we're trying to bring together. So I haven't spoken exactly about Edison because I don't really know the history there, but I can well imagine that somebody who is a great thinker but lacks the capacity to mobilize it is not going to be a Thomas Edison. So we have some questions over here.
So the question online was from Laura, who's just streaming in from work on our lunch break as well, and it was basically about online learning and your thoughts on hybrid learning and online learning, but you can answer the question.
Answer the question and tell Laura the lunch was great as well, so online gives you lunch as well. In person, yes.
Were there any other online questions? Questions from the floor? Last call, questions from the floor. Yes, last question.
Terry Granger, PDR Technologies. Now, every individual is passionate about something.
Hopefully. Yeah.
And it could be all different.
Yes.
You have all these students. How do you give them the skills necessary to have effective engagement in what they are passionate about?
That's a great question. So that is something that so a great question is every student has their own passion, they have their own motivation, they have their own path. How do we give students the tools, the skills to be able to find that passion, to be able to find that path, to hopefully be able to have those encounters, those sort of meaningful moments that really allows that to blossom? And in my mind, then the whole system needs to become more student-centric. So we need to know more about our students, which is a challenge. So they need to be able to tell us the things that they are interested in for us to be able to guide them more effectively. There are things in learning analytics that we're looking at. You've all probably experienced them. You know, when you go shop on some big online thing, you do this, and they say, you might also be interested in this here. There's positive ways to do that as well. But if we knew more about what our students' interests are, and it's difficult because certainly there are privacy concerns as well. At the start of my class, for example, I ask every student to write on a piece of paper, what's your name and what's one thing you want me to know about you? That barely scratches the surface, but at least I've got a list of things, I can remember the names and what they're interested in so that I can tie what I'm trying to say to something that will motivate them to sort of nudge them on that path. It's a really good question.
Is there another online question?
There is. There's a variety of statements here just from alumni that are tuning in that have said that they would like to be more involved with ISTEP and would love to volunteer their time in some way. So I'll connect you with those after.
Oh, I love that.
Wonderful. It made it worth your while to come.
Yeah.
And one of the other questions was, how much input and collaboration do psychologists have in the ISTEP program?
Not as much. We do have an engineering and psychology specialization now. We are more working with the people in education psychology, so we work closely with the School of Education, but not necessarily the pure psychologists. I also want to know, is Paul DeNovo here?
There he is.
So Paul has been at the forefront. Can I embarrass you?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. So Paul was one of the very first to sort of recognize the need for this and donated some money in terms of scholarships we now have for our engineering education students. So I wanted, since you're here in person, I want to thank you personally.
We are getting close to the wrap-up of Lunch and Learn. We aim to finish at 1:30. Professor Evans has agreed to stay. He has another commitment later on this afternoon, so if you want to chat informally with him. Those of us sitting certainly at my table, I'm from the old school of engineering. Obviously, engineering education has been re-engineered, as Professor Evans has indicated here. We've had a fantastic turnout in person here in the atrium at the My Hall Center. It has been a sellout. I've yet to hear what the statistics are for the live streaming. The last few Lunch and Learns have been live streamed, and we've had very good participation from all around the world. So please feel free to stay and chat. Coffee and tea is still available, so you can linger and chat with your colleagues here. But just before we break, I want to announce Lunch and Learn runs typically from October to May of each year. Except for December, we meet at the Faculty Club on Wilcox Street, which is the new downtown home of Lunch and Learn. We typically meet on the second Wednesday of each month. On January 8th, The guest speaker will be Professor Deepa Kundar, who's the new chair of Electrical and Computer Engineering, and her subject will be Cyber Physical Security and Resilience of Smart Grid Infrastructure. Given what's happening around the world, hurricanes, cyclones, you name it, that's obviously a topic that is very current. In February 12th, the second Wednesday, guest speaker will be Professor Mansoor Barati, who will be talking a very short title, Waste to Value, whatever that means. March will be our annual awards luncheon, the class of 3T5, 5T0, 5T3, and 5T6 engineering student awards. We have presentations already confirmed through to May, and I've actually got a short list of speakers who were unable to speak this year to develop the speaker series for next year as well. We've been very gratified with the attendance at Lunch and Learn. The decision to move to the faculty club to meet here at the My Hall Center has turned out to be a smart move. It wasn't my idea, it was my predecessor's idea, and we're glad that you're able to join us. So please join me again. One last round of applause for Professor Ahmed.
Thank you.